Hey Mallards, it is Saturday and today I did not have to go to the fair, which was really nice. Not that I didn't love the fair, just that it was nice to have a day at home. I thought that I was going to sleep in, but my body was like, no, but we've been getting up early and we thought that we had to do that now, so we're just trying it. So that was great for no one. But it did mean that today I had time to do a lot of stuff with my dad. So we watched 3 movies, watched 2 episodes of Ted Lasso, and played and won Pandemic, all of which were great. And this video would be massively long if I tried to talk about all of those things. So instead, I'm just going to talk about 2 of them. We watched 2 films. The first is called Nobody. It stars the guy from Better Off Saul and Breaking Bad. I don't know the actor's name. I should. Christopher Lloyd is also in it. And then some other people that I straight up did not recognize. It starts with this guy sitting at an interrogation table, and he's clearly been beat up. His knuckles are bloody. His face is bloody. He pulls out a cigarette, lights it. Why do people still smoke in films? Great question. Unzips his jacket, pulls out a can of tuna and a can opener, opens that can of tuna, and then pulls a kitten out of the other side of his jacket and places it on the table. And the people interrogating look over and they're like, "Who are you?" And he says, "Nobody." And then you flash back to days before and you learn that essentially he's a family man who, when people tried to break into his house, he got upset. He's fighting with his wife. His oldest kid thinks he's a loser. His youngest daughter is still sweet to him. He has a dead-end job working for his wife's family. It's clear they don't like him very much, and his week is really monotonous. And then he decides, you also get the sense that there's something about him. He talks on like an old ham-style radio to some guy, and it's clear that he was clocking the thieves when they broke in, but his daughter says that they took her kitty cat bracelet. So he decides to go after them, finds out that their family, who unfortunately have a very sick infant. So he takes his watch back, but he doesn't take his money back. And they are like, "We don't know this kitty cat bracelet you're talking about." So then on the way home, he's on the bus and a group of drunk ruffians get on, and they are attempting to rough up a girl. And so he's like, yes, I have had a taste of going after people, and this is clearly something that I used to do and I enjoy. So I'm just going to beat these guys up. And he kindly like gets the other people off the bus, and then eventually the girl, and he has a fight on this bus. Turns out one of those guys is the brother of a Russian mobster, and then the Russian mobster is coming after him, and then you discover that he used to be a trained killer for the government and is now going to use his skills to fight back against this Russian guy who keeps coming after him. And in the end, his dad, played by Christopher Lloyd, and his brother show up to help him. And he reigns victorious at the end. And it's a really fun film. Things I enjoyed about that film, I thought that the fights were really realistic, in that when he took on, I think it's 5 or 6 guys in the bus, you know, he didn't hit every punch and dodge every one of their shots. It's not to say that I don't appreciate a Captain America elevator fight where he just wipes out people as easily as I put on a jacket. But it was nice to see a world that is supposed to be more gritty and realistic actually be more gritty and realistic, as opposed to him being a perfect fighter. He's just clearly more talented than everyone he's going against, which doesn't mean he's going to take them all out. It just means that in the end, he's going to end up being victorious, but not necessarily leave unscathed. And I enjoyed that. I thought that it was really good. I thought that the buildup was good. I liked the film. I also enjoyed that he was clearly getting itchy. He was uncomfortable in his home life, and you sort of see that. Like, him and his wife don't speak. He clearly hates working for his wife's family. And then he has the opportunity to like let loose steam beating these guys up and feels much better. And it's clear that they're jerks, so you don't feel bad that he did it. You feel like he was in the right. And then the whole rest of the time, he's just fighting Russians. Russians are the current bad guys, in case you weren't aware. In the cultural zeitgeist, we've decided that Russians are the ones who will be bad guys at this moment. If it can't be aliens or vampires, it's going to be Russians. And so they're coming after him, and he's fighting back. And there are a lot of good moments in that whole bit. And I feel like it lines up really, really well. I also enjoyed that his family is fine throughout the whole thing. They didn't feel the need to kill any of them to motivate him, because he doesn't need that motivation. They're coming after him. He's fighting back. He gets to use his skills. You learn that he clearly used to work for the government, so he was on the lawful side of things. And there are a couple of really funny moments that I particularly enjoyed. The main highlight being when he gets to the end, he's drawing the Russians to a warehouse, actually the place he worked with his wife's family, and he's drawing them in, and that's when his brother and his dad show up to help him. And he turns to his dad and says, "You brought a lot of shotguns." And his dad, as mentioned, played by Christopher Lloyd, just looks at him and says, "You brought a lot of Russians." And I think that that bit of dialogue is just the absolute perfection of quippy that I really, really enjoyed. There are a couple things about this film that are weird. The pacing is a little strange, but the one thing that really got me is after he first beats up the guys on the bus, he comes home and his wife is sitting up and they have a talk about how they don't get along anymore. And he essentially like shows her that he's all bloodied and she doesn't really react. She doesn't freak out. And then she helps him like super glue his wounds together. And he says, "Just like old times." And so it seems like she used to patch him up when he was a killer and like knew about his life before, in a way that clearly it has become obvious his children, his neighbor, and his father and brother-in-law do not know what he used to be like. And they think of him as this like calm little family man that he has tried to be for the last however long. I don't know how old his kids are. And then later on in the film, after he kills a bunch of guys who break into their house and he's sending his wife away, he says, "You need to take the kids." And she says, "Fine, I'll take the kids somewhere safe. But when I'm done, like, you have to explain what's going on." And I got confused. I feel like there's a disconnect. I feel like they decided at some point that his wife was going to know who he was, and then they forgot to change that scene. Or maybe they decided at some point that his wife wasn't going to know who he was and they forgot to change the earlier scene. I don't know which happened, but there was a bit of a disconnect between those two moments. And I wish that that had lined up a little bit better. But other than that, I really did enjoy it. There's another great moment, which is when the Russian hires a hacker to figure out who this guy is. She gets his FBI file. It's like all redacted. And then there are some photos. And she just walks into the room, throws down the stuff, says, "You don't have to pay me. I'm out. Good luck." And man, if that is not a sign that you've picked on the wrong guy, I don't know what is. So that was really fun. And then I looked up this film afterwards and it said they're going to do a crossover with this film and John Wick. And I thought, now is the time to tell my father I've never seen John Wick. So I told my dad I'd never seen John Wick. And then we watched John Wick. Spoilers for John Wick. So John Wick is a film about this guy who seems like a pretty normal guy. And then some Russian ruffians decide to pick on him. They like his car. And so they come and they beat him up to steal his car. And they also happen to kill his dog. And then it turns out that he used to be a trained professional killer, and like not just any killer, but like the top tier. And now he's mad and he's going back after them. So then he hunts down a bunch of Russians and kills them. And it has a lot of obvious parallels to Nobody, just like on the flip side. So like John Wick has to hunt the Russians versus in Nobody, the Russians are coming to him because they're after him. And so it is a similar vein. John Wick is a little bit better than the guy in Nobody, just in a the film has a little bit more of that magical realism in the way that he fights. He makes it through fights a lot less injured than the guy in Nobody, although he does get injured in the end, but like mostly less injured. They also have a little bit of that same thing that was in Gunpowder Milkshake. There's a hotel where killers go when they're on the job, and clearly business is not conducted there, so it's a safe place to stay while you're working a job so you can recover from injuries or whatever it happens to be. And so that had like that sort of gentleman criminal element to it that is not existent in Nobody. But I also think that's because, whereas in Nobody, as I mentioned, he worked for the government, in John Wick, he used to work for the Russians. So he was not on the side of the law, versus the guy in Nobody was on the side of the law. So that's part of the reason I think that it has that different feel. It is also, though, a very smooth and well done film. Got a lot of stars in it, got a lot of good action sequences. It's a fun use for Keanu Reeves. I really enjoyed it. I had heard about the film in the cultural zeitgeist, and so I knew that a big part of it was that they killed the dog. I had thought, though, that it was a dog that he'd like bonded with and spent years with, and it was his favorite dog. And it is a dog that is desperately important to him because of what the dog represents, but he'd had the dog for like 3 days, so that was kind of interesting to me. This film also, I forgot to mention, does the same thing that Nobody does, which is that it starts at the ending and then goes back and you see how it all happened. And once I watched John Wick, I was like, I clearly see the parallels here and how these films are related, and they do have a lot of similarities. I would say that the difference in John Wick is that they killed the dog, which John Wick's wife is also dead at that, but she died of natural causes, and he doesn't have the same restlessness. He didn't need to get back in the job. The guy in Nobody, his life was going downhill until he got back on the horse and went after those guys. Versus John Wick's life was downhill because his wife died, but he got this dog, and things would have probably been okay if some Russian punks hadn't just shown up and decided to kill his dog and take his car. But similar play out in sort of everything else. I would say one of the differences too is that in that same sort of gentleman criminal ideal, John Wick wears like suits, so he dresses up and he pays a cleaner to come and take care of the bodies when he kills them all in his way fancy house. Like everything is a lot more upper class, versus in Nobody, he burns down his house to deal with the bodies. He's just wearing regular clothes the whole time. He gets roughed up a lot more. Maybe that is some sort of discussion of working in the public sector like Nobody did, or the private sector, because, you know, obviously John Wick worked for the mob. So like maybe there's something to be said about like working in the private sector, and there's probably some sort of parallel commentary on capitalism between those two films if we really sat down and thought about it. Because there are a lot of parallels in story, but it is very interesting to me that the guy who worked for the mob is swimming in dough, dresses much nicer, everything he does is much nicer and much more professional, and the guy who worked for the government is dealing with things on a much more street level basis. Just something to consider. I enjoyed both films. I know that there are 3 other John Wick films, which I find interesting because I don't feel like this film was necessarily set up for a sequel. It ends with him finding another dog. All the loose ends are tied up. Like everybody that he needed to deal with or go after is dead. And even the people who were sort of tangentially coming after him are also dead. So it just wraps up very nicely. So when I see the other ones, I'll be curious to see how that happens. Versus Nobody is clearly set up for a sequel, with him getting a phone call at the end where you don't hear the other side, but it's clearly like, hey, we have a job we need you to do. So I'm interested to see the next John Wick, see if there's another Nobody. If you've seen those films, let me know what you thought of them. I'll talk about the other film and the Ted Lasso episodes at another time. Let me know if you think that the differences between John Wick and Nobody really are a commentary on private sector versus public sector work. And I'll see you tomorrow.